everybody. Welcome to the Daily AI Show. On today's episode, we're diving into what might be the quantum computing breakthrough of the decade or the most overhyped breakthrough announcement of the year. Microsoft just dropped a bombshell claim about achieving a major milestone with Majorana, and I should have figured out how to pronounce this before. Andy will let us know. Yeah? Majorana, thank you. Majorana-based qubits that could potentially revolutionize the entire field of quantum computing. Like, those are pretty big words, but imagine the impact of quantum computing, transforming impossible calculations into trivial operations that take seconds, minutes that would take millions of years, accelerate drug discovery from decades to days, unprecedented accuracy in climate modeling. So, Microsoft's bold claim, they say that they have discovered a new state of matter for stable qubits. And we're going to find out what that means. If that doesn't make sense to you, stick around. Potential scalability from 8 qubits to millions, but that's like a very tall claim. So quantum computers have been a sci-fi staple. Oh, and we are going to do a sci-fi episode on this on Friday. But Microsoft suggests that this is becoming a reality. Again, there's some key skepticism. There's some pushback from the scientists, and Microsoft does have a habit of making really big claims that then sort of get corrected or walked back a little bit. But here we go. Is this the turning point or another overhyped quantum dream? And is this going to reshape our technological and scientific landscape? And if so, how? I'm going to toss to Andy, who knows everything about everything. Andy, will you give us a foundation for the conversation?
I will. I'll give foundations, but like we were saying before the show, I'm a dabbler in these things. Although I will say I did play a physicist on a skit on stage once, so I think I have some credentials. No, in reality, I in college I was given a citation for research in superfluid helium in physics. So I used to have a facility for this, but now I'm long forgotten all of that stuff, and that was ancient history. I wanted to mention that, and when we talk about quantum, there are some major players out there who have been pursuing quantum in the United States. And they're, the foreign laboratories that are working on quantum computing, I don't really have any familiarity with whatever. But IBM has been the leader for some time. And then, we had Google come out with their Willow quantum computer. And then there are, just in time for our show, after Microsoft's announcement, Amazon must have heard that we were going to talk about quantum today, because yesterday they announced their new Ocelot architecture, which is a chip that is error tolerant, just like the Majorana system is error tolerant. It's a smaller implementation without the claim to go to millions of qubits. It's just 9 qubits altogether, 5 of which are the calculation qubits and 4 of which are error correcting qubits. So anyway, Amazon just put a big splash in the pond when it comes to quantum computing yesterday. So now you have 4 major players all pushing the boundaries of what's happening in quantum computing. So you can know that among those various initiatives, someone's going to arrive at quantum capable computing at a dramatically improved scale very, very soon, like within years. So I want to, before we go into the Majorana, the Microsoft method and why it represents a major advance versus Google and IBM's initial drops, if you will, for quantum computing, I wanted to just take a step back and just explain a little bit about quantum for those who don't, as I haven't for a long time, understand what it means when you talk about quantum. So here's a real low-level primer. We all understand electronics, and electronics is a branch of physics that describes and examines the behavior and flow and control of electrons in circuits. and it's quite deterministic and definable. What happens with those electrons? We connect one transistor to another transistor and we follow that path. We can design something that's very predictable in its outcome. And all of our electronics to date are about this flow control of electrons. Quantum technology manipulates subatomic particles and their probabilistic behaviors. And what's amazing about quantum is they don't have to be connected to each other because of a principle of subatomic particles called entanglement. So unlike electronics, it operates at a physical scale that's kind of another order of magnitude smaller than the electron, which is the subatomic particles. But electrons are a fermion, like the Majorana particle. So we're talking about something that's very similar, but electrons, we understand, we hooked up with circuits. Now, when you put qubits together on a chip, they interact with each other without being directly connected. That's the interesting sort of insight that I think comes about. Now, what's the effect of using these things? And I'll explain some of the components of how this works very briefly. It'll be just a few more minutes. But I want to give you a great analogy with credit to the new Claude 3.7 Sonnet, who provided this analogy for how a quantum computer really makes a difference in computation. So here's the analogy. Imagine you have a very large library, the Library of Congress. It has a massive library of books, and you want to find a specific relevant sentence in one of those books. With a classical computer, a single classical computer, like you can buy and put on your desktop, would search through those one book at a time. You could do it very fast. But if you needed to go through the entire Library of Congress, that could take a long time. So what you would do is you would parallelize that process by giving you 100 computers to do the job simultaneously. But that incurs some overhead because now you have to kind of coordinate the activities of all of these computers so they don't run over each other. Hey, I already looked at that book. Don't do that one. So there's all this memory and bandwidth overhead that has the job of coordinating those books. Now, how does a quantum computer work? A quantum computer, even with a very small number of qubits, like the Ocelot architecture that Amazon Web Services uses, just 5 qubits, it can do something magical. It's like opening all the books at once and having the correct page that you're looking for magically glow when you ask the right question. And I'm just going to try to touch upon how that happens. And there's 3 principles of quantum behavior that are combined in order to make that magical glowing elevate, amplify the right solution out of an enormous universe of possibilities. Okay. Most people, when we talk about quantum, they address the superposition capability of quantum phenomena. And what that is, okay, there's, like a classical computer has bits 0 and 1. Well, a qubit has multiple states, not only 0 and 1, but 0 and 1 combined, and all the possibilities in between 0 and 1. So it's not binary. It's not, and quantum isn't even only trinary, if you will. It's all the possibilities in all those things. So there's enormous expansion. It's called exponential state space utilization. Okay. It doesn't have the classical memory overhead you have of trying to parallelize. So there's a concept called quantum parallelization. And that's the first thing. Superposition is this quantum phenomena that lets you have a very broad range of possibilities, all represented by the single qubit. Okay, the next thing is entanglement. You've heard about this as this idea that, okay, if I make a change or even just observe a quantum particle, it's going, if it has a companion particle somewhere else across the universe, it's going to change its state just by my affecting it. So there's this entanglement, which means that there's the possibility in qubit quantum computing to encode the global problem structure across all the qubits in the system. So there's this coordination. And so they call that entanglement mediated correlations in there. And then the final thing is the magic of that amplification, the elevation of the correct solution. And that's called interference. Interference can be used in constructive interference and deconstructive interference. Deconstructive interference suppresses the ones that aren't likely to be, or probabilistically aren't the right solution. And constructive interference elevates the ones and makes it glow. Okay, so that bypasses explicit solution checking. It just brings the answer out of the ether, so to speak. Okay, so this interplay of superposition, entanglement, and interference, and that forms a computational triad in quantum that classical systems can't touch with their oscillating circuits. This is charting the path towards solving problems that are otherwise intractable. Okay, so that's my dabble in the physics of quantum. And I'm going to turn it over to you guys now to kind of give the overview of what the Majorana process looks like.
And that's going to be Jyunmi.
Okay, so in the most general sense, the Majorana chip, right, or the Majorana principle, because Microsoft took the name of an actual particle from science called the Majorana particle. Right? It's this. The state is okay. This is this is where we get into a little more complicated thing. So the big breakthrough that Microsoft claims that they were able to do is create a topological superconductor, right? Or what they're calling a topoconductor, right? There is existing quantum computing uses superconductors or captured ions, firm ions, to create these qubits. So first of all, the Majorana chip, the Majorana 1, and the technology or breakthrough they're working on is in the qubit area. There are many different parts of quantum computing that contributes to the overall effectiveness and the compute that comes out of it. But this focuses on the qubits itself, right? Now, their topological superconductor is able to create the Majorana particle, which can be observed, right? Can be recorded and manipulated so that they can generate the qubits from it. Okay. And the reason why this is a breakthrough, and this is the main takeaway, I think, is that it provides the technology itself is inherently resistant to errors. And that's what all the big buzz is, right? Because just like Andy had said, that new chip that AWS came out with spends nearly half the qubits it can create for error corrections of its own qubits. This breakthrough is that the materials and technology itself is error resistant to like 99% or whatnot. And so go ahead.
Yeah. I have a question for the back of the class. The idea of errors, does that mean that in Andy's description where something starts to glow as the answer, does that mean we have false glowing, like things glow that aren't the answer? Am I following?
As an analogy, yes.
Well, let me just say the glow wouldn't happen. So why errors happen is that when you're mounting a subatomic particle and you're trying to manipulate it, you want it to be in a stable state. And what happens is, there's all kinds of things impinging on that. Radio waves, gamma radiation, and any one of those things can displace the qubits subatomic particle that it's trying to hold and manipulate for calculation purposes. So what happens is the entire quantum state just dissolves when you have these outside factors impinge upon them. So what the Majorana process does is it creates a topology that's stable. The topology, and the example that's used always about topology is, imagine a donut. It has a hole in the middle, right? Now, no matter how many bullets you fire through the outside of the, well, a bullet's a bad example because it's going to blow the donut up. But if you put a pin through the outside of the donut multiple times and make damage to the thing, it still retains that shape with the hole in the center. That's the stable topological state that is going to be resistant to any kind of outside interference. And let me just say that what Majorana is a topoconductor. They've created a new thing physically, which is a semiconductor bottom layer onto which a superconducting thin layer has been layered. And by the way, the Ocelot architecture from Amazon Web Services has a very similar topology, right? It has a semiconductor with a superconductor layer layered on top of it. But the way that the Majorana one was done is such that that little device that they've created out of new materials and out of a new state of matter, that elevates this Majorana particle in a way that it won't be collapsed by outside interference.
Okay, so if we go back to my question, you said it's not it wouldn't be a false glow, it would be a false non-glow. So it's not a false
It
positive.
just stops the whole process.
Right.
Those
So
errors make the whole system collapse.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. Jyunmi.
Okay. Well, let's go back and identify the three pieces of the chip technology, right? So we talked about the topoconductor, right? And that's the main breakthrough that everyone's talking about. And so they've created this through this material synthesis. Then the next component is microwave control, right? This is where they can manipulate the Majorana particles or the with microwave pulses. This is part of the error correction as well. And what they're saying is it has scalable fabrication. Lithographic techniques position nanowires, the nanowires needed into the repeatable qubit arrays that are created, right? And so that can support modular expansion and things like that. Now, I think that it gives us a good basis of what makes why it's important as a breakthrough. But I wanted to also identify what are the other components of quantum computing that needs to be paid attention to, right? So the main thing is, of course, the qubits, but the thing that most quantum computing structures or systems, their biggest concern again is to go back to that error correction, right? Because they want to get that answer in the end. Now, this is done from the biggest concern is temperature, heat interference, right? Thermal interference as part of the process. And so in these various quantum computers, these cooling systems need to get it down to absolute zero. Like the cold, I hear an often reference is colder than the deepest parts of space kind of thing, right? And this is to prevent the thermal interference.
Let me add an idea about why that is, just in terms of physics. All these particles at the atomic level and the subatomic level have energy states. And what we experience as heat or higher temperature makes them move around more vigorously. When you get to a really super cold state, then they settle down and they stop oscillating and gyrating and moving around so much. And they come into a different state that is that actually enables superconductivity. And that superconducting circuit is what we're using in the IBM and Google methods, and in the superconducting layer of these new topological chips, or the materials at the qubit level of the topological chip. So just know that the higher the temperatures go, the less likely it is to stay stable.
Exactly. And so that's that to me, from everything I've been looking at, it seems to be the one of the key crux of quantum computing. Now, here's the thing: is one of the breakthroughs is because of this topoconductor, everything seems to be, they're able to make everything in the lab anyways smaller, right? These other systems are enormous systems. Now, will we see that kind of scalability as the qubits go up? I'm not necessarily sure about that. But the current technical hurdles that we see from this implementation is uniformity, and I guess the cryogenic infrastructure, like I just mentioned, and then the control systems themselves, right? And the manufacturing process through those control systems. So when Microsoft says, hey, this is a huge breakthrough, keep in mind, they also mentioned that it's going to be in the 2030s or 2029, really, when they say it will have full implementation. And we're going to see well into the 2030s before people really have access to it as a commonality kind of thing. But I wanted to mention one of the comments here where they're talking about hybrid and classical. And I think that's a good point to come back to as well, is implementation and the implications of how quantum computing is going to really affect us is, I think, is a good point to launch off from. Because this is a great technological breakthrough, and implementation and growing up upon it till we can actually really use it outside of the lab is going to take a few years. But what does it mean for us now, right? What does the average person know about quantum computing? I think in the media, it's primarily like, oh, well, when the quantum computers come out, we won't have any, cryptography won't be an issue or anything like that. So I wanted to throw it back to you, Andy, in talking about the implications of quantum computing, and when it is here, what are the benefits that we're going to get from it?
Yeah, so most people I think naively about quantum computing as being just an acceleration of computational speeds, right? And they definitely do achieve a dramatic change, but it's a totally different method of computation, right? The glowing concept that I was referring to, which is using interference to elevate the right solution and suppress all the wrong solutions in record time across a vast space, that opens up many new possibilities with larger data sets. And the question is, how soon will we actually have the tooling and the code bases that can actually manipulate questions from natural language into a quantum computer and generate a response? For example, like, we're using huge data centers right now to do that sort of thing, and we're excited by the prospects of AI, but quantum may not be particularly useful in the space of data centers, right? Classical computing may always be the right solution for that kind of generation. But there are other problems that can be addressed using quantum. And, that's why they typically would cite things like, material science and or very large, complex problems like global supply chain logistics, like not just your company's supply chain, but all of them. How do we optimize all of them simultaneously? How do you calculate and come up with solutions around that? It may be that it's going to take us 10 years to get to the point where we have the interface, the coding languages to address the qubits and the companion classical computing interfaces with the quantum computer that can actually deliver something back to your screen.
Okay, but does that then mean, if we're looking at the other things that we think are also happening over this 5 years of potentially massive change outside of this part of it, does that mean that most likely what is happening is that it's not a human interface with the quantum calculations? It's a human interfacing with something like an AI, like your mixture of
Excellent
experts?
point. Excellent point. It's probably not going to be you sitting at a terminal interfacing with a quantum computer. Right now, there's a lot of human hand-holding of these massive, room sized, now coming down to refrigerator sized quantum chips. But it'll be AIs that program and pursue those things. The AIs are excellent coders with Claude Sonnet 3.7 being probably the best out there to date. So yeah, it'll be AIs that interface with them, and then we'll speak to the AI will speak to the quantum computer and in their own language, and then we'll get the results back.
Right. To sort of toss out something that a story that arose from the comments yesterday. If you're not with us on YouTube, in the comments, our watchers are like brilliant and equally as great a show as what's happening in the live stream. So if you're catching us later, go back and watch the comments as they come through. But it probably won't be Gibberlink, but we're recently seeing new, more efficient interfaces from we're saying the AI will talk to the quantum computer. That probably isn't in a language that humans can understand either, right? So like we're getting more and more separation from the thing that's happening. Yeah, I'm now just going to go thing because I've lost the vocabulary for it. But it's both fascinating and also feels a little like, no, seriously, my imaginary friend is like gonna blow everybody's mind, and then does. But it's still people not really understanding. So what does your imaginary friend do? And if you think about it, we still don't know that. Like there are people who still don't really understand that about AI, about machine learning.
Let me touch on another idea that's related to how do you program these things. This is an area that I'm still unsure about, but I do understand that in the labs where they're working with quantum computing, they are using Python and additional languages coupled with Python that address the qubits. And it's not like electronically addressing the qubits. As Jyunmi pointed out, they're using microwaves or lasers to manipulate the qubits. So there's multiple interfaces that have to be combined to address the activity of these subatomic particles and achieve computation with them. So when you program a quantum computer, you not only have to write some kind of code that's going to address the problem, but you also have to have a separate path, a separate programming path that's actually launching the qubits, putting them into their quantum states and assigning roles to each of those qubits in the process. That's a totally different kind of programming language. We don't have those languages available out there in electronics yet, right? It took decades for the sophisticated languages like Python, which are central to the use of AI. That's Python is typically that or R are the languages that are being used to generate artificial intelligence. Those took decades to arrive at. And now quantum is a totally different model where you not only have to do the calculation and direction and instruction to the computer, but you also have to manage and manipulate these physical objects. We don't have to manage and manipulate the physical objects of electrons anymore. They're just circuits hooked up to each other with really well-defined properties. But now in quantum, you have to have a separate programming skill, which is I'm going to manage these qubits and their states in order to allow this other side of the code to work with it. And that's a very rudimentary and probably ultimately false, analogy for how quantum programming happens. But from what I can understand, that's really the challenge. And in the most academic and scientific ways, this is the frontier that people are working with in order to achieve the advances of quantum effects in computation.
Yeah, I think you really highlighted some of the not necessarily roadblocks, or more like the steepness of the track that quantum computing is on. There's these various touch points which explain why Microsoft said, even with these breakthroughs, we don't see a true implementation until really 2029. And beyond that, it may take a decade or two to get to full production, so to speak. I wanted to just go over a few of the things that the innovations and possibilities that fully implemented quantum computing could provide. And these are the things that get people excited about quantum computing. Once we're there, right? This moment, according to Microsoft, this is the moment where now the race is started, right? We've got a technology here that everyone can really just, take off from. But these are the innovations that get me excited about quantum computing. So first of all, I always love science stories. Like, how is this going to improve science in general, right? The idea of accelerated drug discovery, right? Actual, creation and protein folding and analysis of new molecules and things like that are going to help us create cures for various diseases, right? And because of the broad band or broad bandwidth that quantum computing can apply, we can get to these solutions faster, right? The concept of personalized medicine. Every human body, every person, is entire system is unique, right? We have general alignment as a species, but everyone's a little different. So having personalized medicine to me, down to my genome, provides, opens the mind. It's like, oh, what's the perfect regime for you? How do we get you from point A to point B, your desired goals? So that's something that really is interesting.
So Justin commented in it, and I'm wondering if this relates to what you're saying, and I have a question too. Justin says, I think it's cool how both Microsoft's Majorana-based qubits and Amazon's cat qubits are forms of synthetic qubits. Built to get around the limits of natural ones. We have synthetic atoms, people. And what you're talking about in that everything is aware of the I'm going to say what I heard you talk about sounded to me like spooky action at a distance, which I understand as something that is biological, right? It's not a technological. And do you guys know what I mean by spooky action at a distance?
I think you're referring to the concept of entanglement, which is a quantum behavior, right? It's not I don't know that spooky action at a distance exists in biology.
No, it does because I was not prepared to talk about the biology here, but I will maybe go and do some stuff. My memory is things like if you rip a leaf apart and you stick an electric probe on one, you can see the effect on the other part of the leaf that is no longer on that leaf, kind of thing. I could be don't quote this because I gotta go out and do some research. But my sense was that is, yes, an entanglement, and biological entanglement I think is something that is
Yeah,
proven.
I think there is entanglement, but I think it has
Okay.
physical properties. So, for example, there's growing evidence that in a forest, the mycelium that connect the root structures of multiple trees actually provide a communication network among the trees. So that's entangling trees that seem otherwise to us to be separate entities, but in fact they have some kind of communication structure. And there's a great book that may inform this called The Secret Life of Plants, which may be what you're referring to when you talk about the screaming that happens when you tear apart a leaf, and maybe there's some interaction between those. So I won't claim to know. I just don't personally believe in entanglement as a major phenomenon in biology, although there are lots of people who believe in remote sensing, and they believe that there's telepresence and telekinesis that are part of the natural world. And I just haven't experienced them myself, so I don't have that available. Let me jump into something about the actual physical structures of the Majorana topoconductor. So we've just given you the general idea that there's a semiconductor paired with a superconducting layer. And I just wanted to say that the semiconductor technology is something well understood because that's what we make all of our chips out of, right? Transistors are built on semiconductors. So a transistor is a semiconductor in effect. So it decides which way the electron should flow. And then the superconducting layer in the Majorana system, their topoconductor, is aluminum. It's often aluminum in these others. And then all of that is built on a substrate of silicon or sapphire to achieve stability and performance in quantum computing. So there are material sciences that are going into this. So the research isn't simply about building the control mechanisms for the quantum state of the particle. It's also creating new materials and new structures that can hold those states more stably. And all of the players out there are trying to achieve quantum stability that way. And then there's also the whole question of how do you program that and actually get effective work out of it. I think to date, most of the tests of quantum computing have been done with sort of mathematical calculations, pure, simple equations being resolved by the quantum computer. And it's not yet to the point where we can ask it to do more complex tasks.
I want to highlight what you were mentioning there in terms of the material science. So what it's built on and the aluminum, and I think it's an aluminum iridium alloy that they're trying to produce. And this is actually one of the highlights that scientists or people have a little bit of pushback on the hype around the announcement. Any announcement is going to have a degree of hype, and of course if it's from a major enterprise or corporation, it's definitely going to be spun to maximum effectiveness in making them look good. But suffice it to say, the one of the pushbacks is on the scalability of the material manufacturing, right? Because even though they have produced a methodology in the lab to get a 99.999, or known as 5 nines percentage of purity on there, so that there isn't any inclusions or interference through that that material. A 0.01% error in that, right, is enough to stop the qubit expansion, right, past, I think it's like 10,000, right? And they're claiming they want to build onto, up to 1 million. So the key, one of the things about the material science pushback is trying to make sure to get that that process down to 100% purity, so that there isn't any problems, and that will need to be overcome to achieve the claim of 1 million. Now, here's the thing that a lot of people in AI have said about AI, in terms of, we're going to build this AI to get AGI, and then with that AGI, we're gonna ask it to help us get better AGI, right? It's going to program itself. It's going to update itself. Well, this is the same kind of thing with quantum computing, right? One of the interesting implications is, in advanced material science, right, we can create better alloys because it can discover and create better processes to get those alloys. It can create high temperature superconductors, because that's the real key right there. If they don't have to go through the cryogenic process of superconducting at those absolute zero type cooling, and if you could do it at room temperature, that would really blow people's minds, because you knock the lid off of that one. And even things like photovoltaic systems, right? Our solar cells and things like that. This is all kinds of things that you can see from these material science. And so, again, that's another thing where we're sort of chicken and egging this kind of things, like, oh, let us get to a certain point to where it can take off on its own, right? It can sort of snowball that momentum.
And
now,
that's true. So that's true of the energy to run it too, right? So it gets to a point where it can generate its own energy. It can make super efficient use of energy, which is also a part of this, right? We need to get to AGI. We need to completely do things that might be less of a good idea if we thought that was going to be the total state of the world into the future, to get to a place where we don't need to do those dirty energy kind of things in order to get to the next level of whatever, right? This quantum computing, the energy, the data crunching, we're kind of, I mean, it's an investment, right? We're kind of overspending on the assumption, on the hope that the return will justify the overspend. Is that a good way to explain it?
I think so.
I think it's right that we're
if you're
Go ahead, Jyunmi, please.
Go ahead. Okay. I was just saying, I think this is the crux of anyone interested in truly investing, not just making money, but truly investing in new science, or furthering technology, or furthering human advancement and things like that. Investing in the future, so to speak. Right.
So,
and that's the question you got to ask yourself, right? And I think the answer is, right now, while I'm sure it is all currently financial motivations, I think what we're really getting out of this is moving us forward in those in that direction, even though the motivations may be purely financial at this moment.
Yeah,
and that's where alignment comes in, and needs to be everyone needs.
So thank you, because it makes sense. I should expand my definition of investment. I actually wasn't talking about monetary returns. I was sort of seeing us as putting ourselves into a less than ideal deficit state, potentially, on the assumption that we are going to reap rewards in the future, which could also be what college education is, right? Like we or surgery, like we do things on the assumption that in the immediate there's a big cost for a desired end result that we think is probable. Go.
Yeah, I completely agree in the fact that right, there you go. Yeah, no, it's important to this might go a little too philosophical, but it's important to realize that the time put in now in everything that we've seen up until this point, us as a collective, is we want it to be better for the future. We think by doing small or short advancements, we can see a longer return, right? Just for humans as a whole. And I think that's sort of how we've accomplished all of these great feats, is the more people you have throwing their time and energy and thought at a problem over a period of time, you'll see greater and greater results. And I think that's been proven over and over again. So it's hard choices now so that everyone can take advantage of it in the future.
I want to just jump on to finalize this discussion about Microsoft's advances. I want to add a nuance to the way the Majorana particle-based topoconductor is working in the scheme of quantum computing. So one of the things I've always visualized, because I saw the announcement video from Microsoft, and they talked about the Majorana particle, but it seems, based on further research over the past week, that in the Majorana chip, they actually use two Majorana particles combined to form the qubit. So they're launching two, not just one. So the encoding of information in the Majorana particles is done in pairs. And so that's slightly different from the way I thought about it before. And the other thing that's different, and we talked about the topological protection, the special symmetry of the topoconductor that makes it very stable and resistant to any kind of external interference. But there's this other idea, which is that the particles have non-local encoding. So there's some magic in how the information is stored across the pair of Majorana particles. And instead of being at one point in that pair, which would make it vulnerable to an impact disturbance or, an oscillation or, jostling kind of disturbance, the information spread out across the pair and through entanglement across all the qubits, if you aren't isolating the qubits through some programmatic effort. So that idea of putting pairs together and using the pairs as a further sort of lockdown of the stability of the information for processing, along with the topology protection, those things make the Majorana one capable of stable quantum operations in very small form factor, in ultimately, theoretically, millions of qubits in a single chip. But again, the problem with putting millions of qubits in a single chip is, how do you interface with the outputs of that chip? Like, how if you look at the chip that's sitting on your motherboard inside your computer, there's all these connections that have to go into that chip. And that's a problem, especially when you stack these chips up. What are all the connectors that have to be done when you shrink zillions of transistors? I don't know what the current state of the art is in terms of numbers of transistors on an NVIDIA Blackwell, for example. But when you shrink those down, how do you connect all of those to the outside? And that's why in quantum computing right now, all the connectors and the cryogenics create this massive structure for a chip that's only that big, right? Okay. Any other questions about quantum computing?
Yeah,
well,
let's have our final statements here. Jimmy, go.
Okay, so I know off and on we've kind of tried to do counterbalance of this is what they've claimed and this is potential issue, right? And so I wanted to point out a couple of specific concerns from the scientific community about this. While Microsoft did release an additional informative paper after the announcement to provide some more information, we haven't seen real clarity in findings in general. So that's a general concern. But one of the things is everything that they've shown so far is in single qubit operations, right? So with the claims that they're all basing off is when they've created a single qubit, and this is how this is what we've observed, this is the data that we've come up with, and this is what we're presenting. So we haven't seen a how does this work, and what are the observations in a multi-qubit representation? The other thing is, like I said before, is the scalability challenges for manufacturing and control, right? That 0.01% defect could nix their potential millions that they're talking about. We don't have right now. Our current manufacturing can't keep up with that. And the next one is the control electronics, right? We have microwave control systems that max out at 40 gigahertz bandwidth, which wouldn't cover all of the qubits that are needed to be, controlled that way. And it suggests that that won't be overcome until 2028, roughly. Again, these are broad strokes kind of things. And I think probably what is the one thing that the scientific community really has a problem with is there was a 2021 retraction from a Majorana paper that Microsoft was affiliated with that talked about topological qubit claims, and they needed to pull that because it turned out that their findings were incorrect. So people might be a little gun shy on accepting anything that came out of it, especially since that was only a couple of years ago. And it's like, oh, you solved the big problem. That was that kind of thing. And a healthy dose of skepticism in these kinds of fields, I think, is good, because that's what we want from science. It's like, oh, these are your results. Well, let me try and reproduce them. Is that possible? But overall, I think the response or the reception has been overall positive, especially when the government agencies like DARPA and NIST are backing Microsoft's approach. They like what they see. So I hope that answers a bunch of those types of questions for people. Now, I know we've seen a few messages in the chat. It's like, oh, what's the possible dangers and things like that? Well, in a general sense, any rapid advancement in technology outpaces society's capability to understand, accept, and adjust to the realities that once the genie is out of the bottle. So that has always been the case, and there's always a chaotic period in that era when those advancements happen. It happens in every type of technology, in every era of humanity. So when quantum computing becomes mainstream, then that is something that we will have a difficult but hopefully achievable adaptation to fill in that gap. That's all I got.
All right, I'll just provide a very high level summary of what the Microsoft Majorana advance is. It has to do with the stability of qubits and error tolerance for qubits. And it's all around the topological state that's been created in matter. that allows the creation of the topoconductor that's at the heart of the Majorana particle-based qubit. And this is a breakthrough that is the key to building more powerful and scalable quantum computers. And there are alternatives out there. We talked about the neutral atom qubits that are, inherently stable because they're using atoms that don't have as much propensity to be impacted by external factors. And then we also have, and I hope we'll cover at least on the recap show next Friday, we'll dive into or delve into or dabble into the Ocelot architecture that was just announced yesterday by Amazon Web Services and see how it compares to Microsoft's Majorana, because both of those claim to have very stable operations. It seems on the surface that the main distinction is that the chip that Amazon's put forward is a small number of qubits on a chip, whereas the promise of the Microsoft technology and the topoconductor is to put up to 1 million qubits on a chip. I don't know that that's necessary or practical. Even having 1,000 qubits on a single chip is going to be a massively capable computer compared to one that has only 9, where 5 are doing the work and 4 are doing error correction. So there's some comparisons and contrasts that will try to paint for you, those of you who are following the developments in quantum computing.
Absolutely. One quick question about the Amazon one. Was the implication in that announcement that it is in use or that it is in research?
No, they claim to have an Amazon Web Service. It's the Amazon Web Services part of it. So they're going to make quantum computing available to all the people who use that cloud service. And not all the people, because it'll probably be an inherently expensive alternative, practical only for well-funded enterprises that have a very specific, difficult problem to solve that would otherwise take classical supercomputers many years to conduct that, and then it's out of date, right? By the time they come up with a solution, it's no longer relevant to the complexities of Amazon's global distribution structure. So I think that it is in use, but not this one. The Ocelot architecture may not be in use yet. I think that's just coming out of the lab, but they have quantum-like services that are currently available, I believe. I think I read that in the Amazon announcement from yesterday.
So much more to this conversation. Thank you so much for being with us. We want to announce that this was part 1 of a 2-part discussion. The second part will be happening Friday, tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, over on the Sci-Fi AI show, which is there's a link in the chat. We'll pop it in there again. Again, thank you so much for this conversation. We love having you all as our community. Reminder to like the broadcast. I got in yesterday. I was looking at our like numbers and they are low, folks. If you haven't liked, please like. Super helps us out. And yeah, okay. Tomorrow we're talking about N8N, doing a tool review. I believe Brian and Carl will be back. And have a great day, everybody. Tell your friends. Thanks.
Aloha.